Anytime you declare a war on something, you declare a war on poverty, in the case of India in those years, or you declare a war on COVID. I guess the saying goes, the first casualty in a war is the truth. And so that creates a kind of emergency framing around the situation that suppresses debate, that suppresses free speech to some extent. And what you end up with is then these blueprints sort of pushing out alternative ways of thinking about, say, development or the future, or in the case of the COVID response, what different kinds of pandemic responses might have looked like. So that, to me, was very much resonating.
So you actually saw echoes, because partly, I suppose, of, as you say, the state of emergency, and the way in which that then seemed to go along with a whole host of things, such as, yes, a clamping down on discussion, debate, which we still haven't really seen, certainly with academically and even in the public sphere more broadly. There doesn't really seem to be a debate, more just one side saying one thing and another side saying another thing, and no sort of meeting point where people can actually discuss that. So, I mean, for the work you've done on development, made you feel that there was an echo or a resonance of a process which you'd seen play out before?
Yes, absolutely. I saw echoes of this earlier research in what was unfolding in front of me. I suppose that is the beauty of a sort of historian's perspective, or the kind of historical lens. The idea of the history of the present. That you are trying to have a sort of holistic view of what is happening. Which means you don't get so easily swayed by a particular dominant narrative in the media or in the literature, and I think for me, having that reference point, having that work, spending years on that issue of polarization, elitism, blueprints, really, it sort of felt like a deja vu in a way, right? This is sort of history repeating itself in a very different form, in a very different context. But a sort of similar underlying dynamic.
Okay, so I mean, as you say, historians, there are many ways in which what was happening should have really created a resonance for a lot of historians, and yet that didn't happen. As we know, social scientists, people working in the humanities, were quiet. There was almost an omerta around discussing some of the issues which are raised in the book. What do you put that down to within the social sciences? Because as you say, a lot of the things, some of the things which I found very hard to come to terms with are the fact that, for years there have been a lot of research, for example, about the relationship between malnutrition and health and infant mortality. And for years there have been research around, wealth, the relationship between wealth and longevity. So all social scientists knew, as a matter of fact, that reducing, having a major impact on people's wealth is going to have a major impact on health. And yet there was no discussion of this that I was aware of, at least, within and any discussion which was raised was clamped down on. So, I mean, I know the book is a response to that in some ways, but thinking about that question, what do you put that down to? Why do you think that was? Mm-hmm.
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that, so I have prepared a little bookmark in the book, and if you don't mind me just sharing a couple of paragraphs from the introduction, I think, which also
that sounds like a great,
to give a taste of the book and the style in which it is written. But many of the giants on whose shoulders the humanities and social sciences stand, in fact, engaged in work intended to be applicable to the big challenges of the time. The sociologist Michael Burawoy captured this applied spirit of his discipline when he talked about Walter Benjamin's idea of the angel of history, a tragic figure battling society's self-destructive forces, in his 2004 address to the American Sociological Association, which is worth quoting at length. In its beginning, sociology aspired to be such an angel of history, searching for order in the broken fragments of modernity, seeking to salvage the promise of progress. Thus, Karl Marx recovered socialism from alienation. Emile Durkheim redeemed organic solidarity from enemy and egoism. On this side of the Atlantic, W.E.B. Du Bois pioneered Pan-Africanism in relation to racism and imperialism, while Jane Addams tried to snatch peace and internationalism from the jaws of war. But then the storm of progress got caught in sociology's wings. If our predecessors set out to change the world, we have too often ended up conserving it. Fighting for a place in the academic sun, sociology developed its own specialized knowledge. So this idea of fighting for place in the sun, the academic sun. I think is something that a lot of us get caught up in these days in academia. I think we inhabit academic structures that encourage us to do just that. We are encouraged to be highly individualistic, buttressing our CVs, chasing after the next promotion. We've got all of these, performance reviews, these metrics that are in place where quantity really counts for more than quality. In many ways, even within, I guess those. And
you have all these things saying, peer esteem, whatever the hell that is, and all this kind of bullshit.
You look at the REF, right, the sort of research framework that's used here in the UK to evaluate quality of research, and you look at the kind of highest, the most highly esteemed research, is meant to be world changing or world leading. But when you look at what that actually means and what people are calling world-changing or world-leading research in the social sciences and humanities, you see that it has very little to do, oftentimes, with what is actually happening in the real world. That there's a sort of real divide. In the introduction to the book, we talk about this divide between the so-called pure and the so-called applied.
So you think it's actually a process of kind of world distancing, if you like, that as the social sciences and humanities have become more self-referential, perhaps, and more immersed in trying to get a corner of relevance out of government, which has been so much more increasingly directing that at science, technology, medicine, that it's lost connection to what's actually happening in society, in the world. Is that?
I think that's definitely part of the picture. I think there's more to it, though. I do think also just from conversations that I was having around this time with colleagues, I think there were quite a few people who privately, would talk about their reservations about the policies that were being put forward, but they wouldn't be willing to do that publicly or sort of go on the record. And I think this is something to do with, you could say, maybe moral courage, to be able to speak up in a way that makes you a target potentially. But I think it also has to do with the kind of precarity that a lot of academics are in. I think you and I are both lucky in that we have permanent academic posts. Lots of people are not so lucky, right? So if you are somebody who is underemployed or employed in a very precarious position, you don't really necessarily see yourself as somebody who has a platform from which you can critique things, because there is this sense, and whether I'm sure in some cases that's real, in some cases it's perceived, but certainly there is a sense, that you will get in trouble, you will lose the source of your income, you might not be able to be a part of academia.
People won't write references for you. I think this is all very true. And again, it shows the way in which it's interesting, because a lot of the discourse around the failings of academia in the pandemic have, certainly on the libertarian right, which of course has taken the most active position in terms of critiquing what's happened for its own ideological purposes. But a lot of that has been based around, this is because of socialism or because of the capture of the unions. But actually, and I completely agree with you, it's been produced by neoliberalism. It's been produced by the neoliberal framework within universities, which produces precarity and means, as you say, that speaking up might mean that, you simply lose your capacity to work, and the increasing precarity of the academic sector. Of course, one of the things that I think academics get and misunderstand is that they think that's just academia. It's not. It just mirrors and reproduces what's happening in the wider world, I think. But I think that's a very important point.
And I would maybe also add, so we talked about the kind of distancing as one dynamic, sort of neoliberal academia, as you put it, and I agree with that description as another. And I think I would maybe add a third kind of element into the mix, pretty toxic mix, arguably, which is also just the kind of shortening attention spans and the kind of quest for simple, clean, neat narratives that comes from the media landscape. Because as an academic, if you are trying to intervene in the media landscape or intervene in culture, more broadly, you are subject to the expectations of that culture. And I think we do live in a culture where complexity, nuance are not favored, are not encouraged, are not demanded. And I think it is a lot easier sometimes, to be a scholar, working in sort of natural sciences or engineering or medicine, and present your findings in a way that is fairly clear cut and doesn't sort of leave much room for debate or dispute. But as a social scientist, we trade in debate, we trade in complexity, we trade in nuance. And we are not necessarily trained or used to or encouraged to really get that nuance across in the way that we engage with the outside world. And so I think there's something just around, I don't know if this is social media or what the kind of different factors are at play, but yeah, we are simply not in a point in time, where complexity is cool.
And I think that also goes with actually the world distancing that we've been talking about, because on the one hand that's very true. On the other hand, the academic discourse itself within these disciplines becomes ever more complex in its way, and so ever more remote.
In a very kind of opaque way.
Yes.